On a cold, rainy night, the city streets were empty, save for the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Beneath an old, tattered coat, a homeless man named Jack shuffled through the alleyways, clutching a small backpack that held everything he owned. As he turned a corner, his eyes fell on a shivering stray dog, huddled against a wall, its matted fur soaked from the rain. Jack paused, his breath visible in the icy air, and knelt down, speaking softly. "Hey there, buddy. You look like you could use a friend." The dog's eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion, met his, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. Despite having almost nothing to his name, Jack reached into his bag, pulled out the last piece of bread he had, and held it out. The dog hesitated, then crept forward, drawn by Jack's warmth and kindness. That small act of compassion would spark an unbreakable bond between man and dog, a bond that, years later, would lead to a repayment so unbelievable it would leave everyone in awe. Jack wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. He lived on the edges of society, moving through the city with quiet resilience, clutching his small backpack filled with worn clothes and a few precious keepsakes. His life had taken a hard turn years ago, a string of bad luck and circumstances that left him without a home. Yet, despite his struggles, Jack never let go of his kindness. It was on one of those cold, lonely nights that Jack found himself in an alley, sharing what little he had with a stray dog he later named Buddy. Buddy wasn't much to look at when Jack first saw him, just a scruffy, matted pup with wide brown eyes and ribs that showed through his wet fur. But something about Buddy's gaze tugged at Jack's heart. "You're not so different from me, are you?" Jack said, offering the pup a reassuring pat on the head. From that moment on, they became inseparable. Jack and Buddy were more than companions. They were survival partners. Together, they faced long, cold nights under bridges and shared scraps of food scavenged from bins. Jack often gave up his portion to make sure Buddy was fed. "You're my family now," he'd whisper, curling up beside Buddy for warmth. The townspeople soon began to notice them, a man and his dog walking through the streets, side by side. Some shook their heads, unable to understand why Jack would take on the responsibility of a dog when he could barely care for himself. But Jack never saw it that way. "He saved me too," he'd say with a smile, watching Buddy wag his tail at the smallest gesture of kindness. Despite their hardships, Jack and Buddy found joy in the little things. Buddy would chase after leaves blown by the wind, his scruffy tail wagging as if he didn't have a care in the world. Jack, in turn, found solace in Buddy's unshakable loyalty. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose, someone to care for, someone who depended on him. Buddy's trust in Jack grew stronger every day, and Jack's love for Buddy became his anchor. What neither of them knew was that this bond, forged in the darkest of times, would lead to a miracle that no one would ever forget. Life on the streets was harsh, and for Jack and Buddy, every day was a test of endurance. They battled the biting cold of winter nights, the hunger that gnawed at their stomachs, and the judgmental stares of passers-by who avoided their eyes. But through it all, they had each other, and that made the struggle bearable. There were days when Jack would go without food just to ensure Buddy had enough to eat. He'd scavenge behind restaurants, hoping to find scraps of meat or stale bread. "Eat up, Buddy," Jack would say, breaking the food into small pieces and placing it on a discarded paper plate. Buddy, sensing Jack's sacrifice, would nuzzle against him afterward as if to say, "Thank you." On particularly cold nights, they'd huddle together under a thin blanket Jack had salvaged. Buddy's small, scruffy body was a source of warmth, his soft breaths a reminder that Jack wasn't truly alone. "You're my little heater," Jack joked once, though his voice trembled from the cold. But the streets weren't just cold. They were dangerous. One evening, as Jack and Buddy settled under a bridge for the night, an aggressive stray dog approached, growling and snapping. Jack immediately stepped in front of Buddy, shielding him with his own body. The stray lunged, and Jack managed to fend it off, but not without injury. A deep gash on his arm began to bleed, and Jack winced in pain. Buddy didn't leave his side. The little dog licked Jack's wound with an urgency that seemed almost human, refusing to let him rest until the bleeding stopped. Jack chuckled weakly. "You're a nurse now, huh?" he said, his voice laced with both gratitude and exhaustion. As the days turned into weeks, their bond only deepened. Jack began to notice how Buddy seemed to sense his moods, nudging him gently when he was feeling down or barking excitedly to lift his spirits. In Buddy's eyes, Jack saw hope, a reason to keep pushing forward. Despite the hardships, Jack never regretted taking Buddy in. "We're a team," he'd often say, stroking the dog's matted fur. And while they had no idea what the future held, one thing was certain. As long as they were together, they could face anything. What neither of them could predict was that their loyalty to each other would soon lead to a life-changing turn of events, one that would prove just how powerful their bond truly was. One chilly morning, as Jack and Buddy sat near a bustling corner of the city, something unexpected happened. Jack, his hand outstretched with a small cup, wasn't asking for much, just enough to get through the day. Buddy sat faithfully beside him, his scruffy golden fur drawing the attention of passers-by. A kind stranger, a middle-aged man in a gray overcoat, stopped in front of them. "That's a loyal dog you've got there," the man said with a warm smile, kneeling to scratch behind Buddy's ears. Jack nodded, a hint of pride in his tired eyes. "He's my best friend," he replied simply. The man introduced himself as Michael, a small business owner. Moved by Jack's situation and his devotion to Buddy, Michael offered him a job. "I run a hardware store down the street," he explained. "I could use someone to help out around the shop. It's nothing fancy, but it's steady work, and you can bring your dog." Jack was stunned. It had been years since anyone had offered him a hand, let alone a chance to rebuild his life. "You mean it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Michael nodded. "Come by tomorrow morning, and we'll get you started." That night, as Jack and Buddy settled into their usual spot under the bridge, Jack couldn't help but smile. "Looks like things are looking up for us, Buddy," he said, scratching the dog's head. Buddy wagged his tail, his wide brown eyes reflecting the hope in Jack's voice. The next day, Jack arrived at the hardware store with Buddy trotting happily beside him. Michael handed Jack a broom and showed him around, explaining his tasks. Buddy quickly became a favorite among the customers, sitting patiently by the counter and wagging his tail at anyone who approached. As the weeks passed, Jack threw himself into the work, grateful for the opportunity. With his first paycheck, he bought a sturdy leash and a warm blanket for Buddy, ensuring his loyal friend was comfortable. Slowly but surely, life began to change. Jack found a small room to rent, where he and Buddy could finally sleep safely. For the first time in years, Jack felt like he had a purpose. Every morning, he'd wake up to Buddy's wagging tail, a reminder of the journey they'd been on together. "We're not just surviving anymore," Jack said one evening, scratching Buddy behind the ears. "We're living." Little did Jack know, this life-changing opportunity was just the beginning. Buddy, the dog he had saved from the streets, was about to repay him in a way no one could have ever imagined. Years passed, and Jack's life had changed in ways he never thought possible. He and Buddy had built a routine: early mornings at the hardware store, walks in the park, and quiet evenings in their small but cozy apartment. Buddy, now a little older with a touch of gray around his muzzle, was still the same loyal companion who had stayed by Jack's side through it all. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges, even when things seem steady. One late afternoon, while walking home from the park, Jack began to feel unwell. A wave of dizziness hit him, and his steps faltered. Clutching his chest, he tried to steady himself, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the sidewalk. Buddy immediately sprang into action. Barking loudly, he darted around Jack, trying to get the attention of nearby pedestrians. When no one stopped, Buddy made a bold decision. He dashed into the street, barking at the top of his lungs, weaving through cars and drawing the attention of a passing paramedic. The paramedic, a man named Ethan, noticed Buddy's frantic behavior and quickly realized something was wrong. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, following Buddy's urgent barks to where Jack lay unconscious on the sidewalk. Kneeling beside Jack, Ethan checked his vitals and called for backup. "Good boy," Ethan said, glancing at Buddy, who whined softly and nudged Jack's hand. "You just might have saved his life." Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, and Jack was rushed to the hospital. Buddy refused to leave his side, sitting quietly in the corner of the ambulance, his eyes fixed on Jack the entire time. At the hospital, Doctors discovered that Jack had suffered a mild heart attack. They assured him he would recover with rest and care, but emphasized that Buddy's quick action had been crucial. If your dog hadn't gotten help when he did, one doctor explained, things could have been much worse. Jack, still groggy but overwhelmed with gratitude, reached out to Buddy, who licked his hand gently. "You saved me, Buddy," Jack said, his voice breaking. "You really are my guardian angel." News of Buddy's actions spread quickly, starting with the paramedic who couldn't stop telling the story of the dog who led him to a man in need. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon Jack and Buddy became the talk of the town. People were moved by their bond, how Jack had saved Buddy when he was just a scared stray, and how Buddy had repaid that kindness in the most incredible way. Donations poured in to help Jack with his recovery, and a local organization offered to sponsor Buddy's care for life. As Jack recovered in the hospital, Buddy rarely left his side. The staff quickly grew fond of the loyal dog, often sneaking him treats and blankets to make him comfortable. Jack, now reflecting on everything they'd been through, couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by gratitude. "You've always been there for me, Buddy," he said, gently scratching behind the dog's ears. "First I saved you, and now you've saved me. We're even." When Jack was discharged, he found that the community's generosity had transformed his life yet again. The story of Buddy's heroic act had inspired a wave of kindness. Strangers donated funds to help Jack secure a better apartment, one with plenty of space for Buddy to run and play. A local pet store gifted Buddy a year's supply of food, and Jack received offers for new job opportunities. Buddy became somewhat of a local celebrity. The hardware store where Jack had worked created a mural featuring Jack and Buddy together, with the words "A Bond Beyond Words" painted underneath. People often stopped Jack on the street to ask about Buddy, who wagged his tail happily, basking in the attention. Inspired by their story, Jack decided to pay it forward. He began volunteering at a local shelter, sharing his time and experiences to help stray animals find homes. "If Buddy taught me anything," Jack often said, "it's that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life." Buddy continued to be Jack's loyal companion, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. And though their lives were no longer defined by hardship, they never forgot where they came from. Years later, when Buddy passed away peacefully in his sleep, Jack honored his memory in a special way. With the help of the community, he established Buddy's Fund, a program dedicated to supporting homeless individuals and their pets. The fund ensured that no one would ever have to choose between their survival and caring for their beloved companion. A small statue of Buddy was placed in the park where Jack and Buddy had spent so many happy moments. The plaque beneath it read, "In honor of Buddy, a friend, a savior, a reminder that love is always worth giving." Jack often visited the statue, sitting quietly and reflecting on the dog who had changed his life. Though Buddy was gone, the love they shared had created a legacy that would inspire kindness for generations to come.